Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome to the final episode of the Pokémon Film Perspectives. Now, apologies in advance if it sounds like I'm off in any way. I'm getting over a sickness that's been hitting me all week, so right now my throat is iffy to say the least. I can't hit as high octaves as I normally would while speaking, so you're going to have to deal with me sounding weird for this video. Apologies in advance, I got cough drops here, and if my throat gets dry, I've got a Powerade right here, so I hope that at least lessens the levity of my inane ramblings today. But anyway, for this final video of the Pokemon Film Perspectives, we're going to be taking a look at the first and so far only live-action film to be released as part of the Pokemon franchise, Pokémon, Detective Pikachu. And believe it or not, when I first heard about this movie, I thought it was a joke. Like, legitimately, I thought this film was a gag. When I heard online that there was going to be a live-action Pokemon movie based off of a side game, I thought to myself, this has to be a gag, or maybe even just a fan film. This cannot actually be a real movie that's being made. But trailers are being spread around, and I decided to see if they were legit. And even throughout it all, I was still dubious. Like, I did not recognize the lead actor, Justice Smith. I think it's Justice Smith. Let me look at this right now. Yeah, Justice Smith. So I didn't recognize anything. I looked at the designs of the Pokemon and thought this looks like something out of a fan movie. But then I heard Ryan Reynolds' voice coming out of Pikachu's mouth, and I'm like, this is legit, isn't it? So yeah, we had an official live-action Pokemon movie. However, I didn't really know how to feel about it. Like I said, it's a live-action Pokemon movie, a live-action video game Pokemon movie. And if we've established anything in the last several decades, video game movies are iffy to nail down. It's very hard, when they're actually made, they don't always capture the spirit of the game, or barely touch on what people love about the game, or use the game as like a very loose blueprint and then just go off in their own direction with only the smallest of connections to them. So a live-action Pokemon movie was a little hard to get by, and like I said, it was based off of a spin-off game, Detective Pikachu. So it was very hard for me to get behind this and think and say, yeah, this is gonna work. Regardless, though, the film was on its way to getting out, and the more material I saw for the movie, or more promotional material at least, the more I was leaning towards wanting to see it. What I was being presented with was not bad, and while I admit there was a bit of uncanny valley from seeing them attempt to recreate the looks of Pokemon in live action with obvious CGI, I did grow used to it, and I will give the movie a compliment right off the gate before we even talk about the plot summary. I actually grew to love the designs of the Pokemon in this movie. Yeah, it takes some getting used to, but quite frankly, I think they're perfect transitions from the anime and video games to live action. I think the designs transfer well. I actually think they look like real animals. Pikachu looks soft and fluffy. The cute Pokemon look cute. The threatening Pokemon look threatening. Seriously, Charizard looks fucking awesome. Same goes for Gyarados. Quite frankly, I think the transition to live action of the Pokemon worked well, but looking good is one thing. The film itself still has to be able to have a good story, a good tone, and actually has to make the audience believe that the people behind the camera actually give a shit about the source material. And like I said, the more emotional material that was coming out for the movie, the more convinced I was to give it a shot, especially with what was coming out of Ryan Reynolds' channel. One of my favorite bits of promotional material that he did for that was that he was on his way to pick up his kids when he was told that he got the role of Detective Pikachu, and then he just dove right into the role because Pikachu didn't know those kids, so he left his kids at school, and the video is interviewing him and his family, and his wife's like, he left our kids, and he's like, no, I had to get into the role of Pikachu, I had to get down on the ground, try to lose a bunch of weight before doctors intervened. I don't know, it was just a bunch of fun stuff, and it gave me good confidence that the film would actually be something worth watching. With that said, do I still think it holds up right now? Well, let's wrap up the Pokemon Film Perspectives by looking at Pokemon Detective Pikachu. So, long-ass plot summary time. So, the film, like all Pokemon movies, has an opening prologue. In this case, the film actually opens up at a lab, and what's being studied at the lab? Mewtwo. We see Mewtwo as it's being held inside a pod by various scientists, and it manages to escape, as a short circuit somewhere in the lab ends up having an adverse effect on the pod that it's in, and it allows Mewtwo to wake up from its pod before it manages to completely decimate it and then just flies on out of there. And the reason why it's flying out so fast? Well, you see, it senses that there's someone outside the lab who's getting away. Someone who gets in a car and drives off, and Mewtwo seems to be following this person after it escapes the lab. However, whoever this person is manages to get as far as a bridge before something ends up blasting him right off the road, and, well, that's the last we see of that scene for a while in this movie. From there, we cut to a week later, as we meet our true main character for this movie. In this case, a boy named Tim Goodman, and he's not your average MC in a Pokemon movie. In this case, he's not a Pokemon trainer who's aiming to be the best. He doesn't have a Pokemon partner on him. No, he actually works in insurance. Yeah, he had dreams when he was a kid of being a Pokemon trainer, but unfortunately, those dreams died after the death of his mother. And the thing is, his father is not in the picture. His father is actually a detective that works in another city, and while his father attempted to get Tim to come live with him, Tim unfortunately was resistant to it, and when he was growing up, he and his father drifted apart after his mom's death, and his father dove right into his work. It's part of why he moved away. And while his father did attempt to bridge the gap with, like I said, having Tim move out with him, at that point, too much damage had been done, and Tim didn't want to have anything to do with his dad. So, ever since then, Tim's been living in his hometown of... And unfortunately, most of his friends have left as, well, it's the Pokemon universe. Everyone's gone off to go on their own Pokemon journeys. And the one friend who's still around is not going to be staying for long, as he has his own journey he wants to go on. However, before he goes, he wants to help Tim get his own Pokemon partner. In this case, a Cubone, which... it doesn't end well. Tim tries to connect with Cubone, and he ends up accidentally insulting it when he tries complimenting it for wearing its mom's skull. And when he tries throwing a Pokeball to catch Cubone, Cubone ends up breaking out and then ends up kind of attacking Tim with its bone. As such, Tim and his friend just consider that a lost cause, not going to work. As they go back into town, as Tim wants to get into work. But once they're in town, Tim's cell phone managed to finally get reception, and he's got a bunch of messages on there. And it's here we learn exactly who was in the car that was blown up in the prologue. It was his dad, and apparently he's being reported as dead. So, yeah, when Tim hears this, he basically is asked to come to where his dad lived in order to, settle his affairs, so to speak. And where his dad lived was actually a mega city called Rhyme City. And this is where we get a bit of exposition. And I'm going to look at my notes for a second, so I'm going to pause this for a sec. Sorry about that. But yeah, the founder of Rhyme City was actually a man named Howard Clifford. And the thing is, Howard Clifford suffers from a debilitating neurodegenerative disease. Basically, his muscles are no longer working, and given enough time, he'll lose complete control of his body. And as such, when Howard learned this, he wound up stepping down from his company, which, gotta look at my notes again, sorry about that, should have looked that up right away. Pause, damn you. His company was called Clifford Industries. Yeah, that's his last name. But yeah, he stepped down as the chairman of Clifford Industries and traveled the world attempting to find a cure for his disease. Unfortunately, he never found one. But in his travels, he connected with many Pokémon, and he believed that his experience with these Pokémon allowed him to, as he puts it, evolve into the best version of himself. And in that spirit, and with the help of his son, Roger Clifford, who was put in charge of the company after his dad left, he wound up building a city to try and share that ideology with the rest of the world. In this case, Rhyme City. And Rhyme City in itself is basically a metropolis of technology and wonder, but how it encapsulates what Howard was going for was that in this city, humans and Pokemon are supposed to just live side by side as equals. There are no trainers that are allowed to train here. There are no Pokeballs allowed. There are no Pokemon battles allowed. It's basically just everybody lives their lives in harmony. And while people are not disallowed from having Pokemon partners, that's what they are. They're supposed to be partners, friends, equals, so to speak. So as a result, this is just supposed to be a utopia for both people and Pokemon. And yeah, like I said, this is where Harry set up shop as a detective. So Tim ends up getting a train ticket right there with him encountering a Lickitung on the train right over. It's great. But Tim arrives in Rhyme City, and hence the Rhyme City Police Department, where he meets up with Harry's boss, Lieutenant Yoshida. And while Yoshida does try to talk with Tim about Harry, it's clear that Tim doesn't want to talk about his dad, as any topic of conversation about Tim's life or his relationship with his dad is just immediately halted. And a little subtle thing that I noticed when watching the movie, through a good chunk of it, there are many scenes where Tim refers to his father and just refers to him by Harry instead of my dad. So it's very clear that there's a disconnect there, as Tim just does not want anything to do with his dad. Regardless, though, Lieutenant Yoshida does end up handing Tim the keys to his dad's apartment, and so Tim that evening does go to his dad's apartment building and even goes to check his mail. However, when he does this, he ends up running into a girl named Lucy Stevens, who turns out actually works at the local news station for Rhyme City. Well, sort of. She's an intern, and she actually works on the blogs and typically does lists, including the top 10 cutest Pokemon list, which she thinks is absurd because all Pokemon are cute. But the thing is, Lucy was actually staking out this hotel because, well, she wants to be a big-time reporter. And she actually was looking into a case that Tim's dad was involved with, as apparently there are rumors that are going around that he was investigating something big and that his death was part of some kind of cover-up. And so Lucy wants to get any answers, and obviously Tim can't provide any because he had absolutely no idea what the hell his dad was up to, but Lucy does tell him where he can find her if he wants to talk anymore, and so she amps Grace from the building. As such, Tim goes to his dad's apartment, and we do get a few subtle hints about what happened in the apartment, or what happened between Tim and his dad, as we see Tim going around, and yeah, the place is obviously meant for Tim's father, but there are a few things in there that were clearly meant for Tim. Like, in his dad's bedroom, he finds a birthday card that Harry sent Tim when he was either younger or was planning to send him, and inside was a ticket to Rhyme City, and basically just Harry telling Tim that if he wanted to come, he'd have a place for him. And when Tim goes in the back, he actually finds a room that's decked out like his childhood bedroom. So clearly Harry did want Tim here, and he wanted to make him feel as at home as possible. I admit, it's actually some nice stuff, and it's actually through here we get a bit more flashback about why Tim didn't go to live with Harry, as Tim admitted during when he talked with Lieutenant Yoshida that his grandmother primarily raised him. And yeah, it's clear that that's a side of his family that Tim would prefer to be more associated with. However, as Tim is looking through his dad's crap, he ends up finding what looks like a vial of strange purple liquid, and when he tries opening the vial, he ends up getting a good snoot full of purple gas, which causes him to go into such a big coughing fit that he has to open a window. But the gas ends up being expelled out into the night air, and a group of Apom end up breathing it in. Only when they breathe it in, it seems to cause a reaction, as all the Apom just go, well, for lack of a better term, ape shit. After this, though, it's when we see Tim looking at all the stuff that his dad set up for him, but as Tim is doing that, he hears a commotion in the apartment and goes to investigate, with him grabbing a stapler as a weapon. And so he sees the shadow of someone in the living room and tells the person that they have to leave, but when Tim gets close and sees who broke in, he finds a Pikachu in a detective hat. As such, Tim just thinks, oh, a Pokemon just broke in. Well, I'm going to have to try and get it out. And so he tries kind of talking to the Pikachu like, hey, come on, what are you doing in here? Only for the Pikachu to talk back, with the voice of Ryan Reynolds no less, as it tells Tim that he should put the stapler down or it'll electrocute him. Which Tim does. And what I love is that the Pikachu immediately is like, wait, you can understand me? And he can tell from Tim's reactions, like, oh yeah, you can understand me. That's heavy eye contact right there. That's clear understanding. You know what I'm saying. So, yeah, Tim's in awe that he can actually understand this Pikachu before he has a chance to really fester on this knowledge. Well, it turns out that the wild Apom end up breaking into the apartment as Tim left the window open, so they took that opportunity to try and jump in. As such, one of the Apom ends up attacking Tim and Pikachu, and while they're able to distract that Apom by throwing in an apple, the rest of the Apom come running in, and Tim and Pikachu just have to make a run for it, with them both running to the roof, and the Apom just making grabs at Tim wherever they can, to the point where they actually end up stripping him down to his underclothes. As they grab his shirt, he's in his undershirt, they grab his shoes, they grab his pants and leave him in his underpants. It's actually kind of funny. And eventually the chase ends up leading Tim and Pikachu to a construction area, and they end up managing to escape the Apom by riding down a chute that leads them right into a garbage can. As such, they do manage to escape the Apom, but by the time they get out into the street and start calling for help, the Apom seem to have calmed down, and even as a peace offering, they try to give Tim his clothes back, or at least his pants, so what can you do? However, with that danger past, Tim is once more focused again on the fact that he can understand this Pikachu. And as such, he begins asking people if they can understand it as well, but they can't. From their perspective, all Pikachu is saying is Pika, 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 like a regular Pikachu would do. And so Tim thinks that the problem must be him, that it must be that weird purple stuff that he breathed in. But Pikachu doesn't think that might be the case. As such, Pikachu and Tim do get a chance to talk at a coffee shop, and Pikachu admits that basically the reason why he was in that apartment is because he knows Harry, or at least he thinks he knows Harry. You see, the hat that he's wearing on his head actually has Harry's name in it, as well as the address for his apartment. And so Tim and Pikachu are able to deduce that Pikachu was specifically Harry's Pikachu. And the reason why I'm saying both of them are deducing this is because, well, Pikachu has amnesia. He can't remember anything beyond a week ago, and he's been wandering around ever since, and was using this address as his only clue to figuring out who the hell he was. And as such, when he returned to the apartment and found Tim, that was the first time he was the first time that anyone ever was able to actually communicate with him. Now, Tim, of course, tries telling Pikachu, "No, Harry's dead. They told me," but Pikachu tells him that can't be right because, like I said, this Pikachu was Harry's Pikachu, and if it's alive, then odds are Harry is alive. The question is, though, where is he? What happened to him? Why has he not appeared out of the woodwork yet? And as such, Pikachu does tell Tim that if they want to find the answers to where Tim's dad is, then they need to work together here. Well, at first, Tim is kind of resistant to working with the talking Pikachu. Eventually, he does warm up to it as Pikachu does tell him that he wants to find answers, and as such, Tim reluctantly does decide to help Pikachu to try and figure out what his dad was looking into. As such, they go back to the apartment because technically both Pikachu and Tim have a claim to the place, and so they go in there and they both hunker down for the night. But when Tim wakes up the next day, Pikachu's turned the entire apartment into a detective office as he has clues laid up all over the place to try and find anything that could lead them to Harry. As such, Tim wants to go back to the vial, because clearly whatever Harry was working on, it must have had something to do with that vial. It caused those Apom to go apeshit, so there must be something important to it. But even a vial is only so far to go. They don't know where Harry got it, why he had it, and so forth. But Tim thinks he knows someone that'd be able to actually lead them down the right path, and sure enough, he and Pikachu end up going to the news station, where coincidentally that's where Howard and his son Roger are, as they're filming a promo for basically a Pokémon parade that's going to be happening in the town, that's going to be happening in the city in a few days. It's supposed to be celebrating the 10th anniversary of the city's founding. And while on camera, Howard and Roger seem to be hitting it off like father and son. Off camera, there's clearly some tension between them, as Howard ends up rolling away in his wheelchair, and we even see that he has a Ditto as a helper, as it can shapeshift into someone to help push him along. So, yeah, that's a thing. Regardless, though, Tim manages to meet up with Lucy, and Lucy, of course, is still trying to make a big name for herself. Even tries hosing up with Roger, but gets shut down. But when Tim mentions that he's found a lead on what happened to Harry, Lucy brings him back to her office, and we even see that her partner is a Psyduck, which Pikachu is immediately afraid of because when Psyducks get a headache, it can cause an explosion, so what can you do? Regardless, though, it turns out Lucy herself also has a few of those R vials, and the reason why she has them is because, well, her investigation into Harry. Apparently, Harry was looking into the source of various missing Pokemon and this R stuff, and Lucy was able to follow the clues that he followed to basically a contact by the docks, and it's through that contact that she was able to get her hands on a few vials of the R herself. As such, Tim and Pikachu take Lucy's advice. Again, sorry about the strained voice. I'm sure it's pretty annoying to hear on camera. But anyway, Tim and Pikachu end up taking Lucy's advice and go out to the dock that evening to try and find Harry's contact. And at first, it seems to be a bust, as all they run into is a Mr. Mime. But the instant Mr. Mime sees Pikachu, it begins freaking out and tries running away. And as such, they're able to deduce that the contact was actually the Mr. Mime, which actually is a very humorous scene where it tries running away, but clearly isn't doing anything, as it's Mr. Mime. It's just running in place before getting on a motorcycle and riding away, and again, doesn't do anything. And all it takes is for Tim to just get in front of it, and it quote-unquote crashes. So, what can you do? Regardless, Tim and Pikachu end up interrogating Mr. Mime, and basically how they're able to get Mr. Mime to talk is that they mime that they pour gasoline on it and threaten to light a match if it doesn't say anything, which I love. It's actually a really funny scene. Pikachu is not good at charades. Mr. Mime tells him to shove it. It's great. I love it. But this interrogation tactic does seem to work, as Mr. Mime tells the pair that if they want to find the source of the R, then they need to go to a place called the Roundhouse. And so the pair of them end up going there, and it turns out the Roundhouse is actually the name of an underground Pokemon fighting ring, as people come there with their Pokemon and they do what Pokemon do best, and just duke it out in an arena. Everybody comes around to watch it. Humans and Pokemon. I'm not even joking. We see people and Pokemon in the stands, so clearly the Pokemon are having just as much fun as the humans are watching it, so it's all good and dandy. However, as Tim and Pikachu are looking at the fighting they end up getting recognized by the owner of the place, because apparently when Harry came here with Pikachu, well, in order to get this guy to talk, Harry entered Pikachu into the tournament, and, well, Pikachu wound up delivering a thunderbolt right to this guy's Charizard. It even has a scar on its face from where it was attacked. And as such, Tim basically says he doesn't want any trouble, he just wants to know where the guy got the R, but the guy says he won't tell them anything unless he can get a rematch with Pikachu. As such, Tim and Pikachu agree to these terms, and Pikachu thinks, oh, he's got this, he beat this guy's Charizard before, he could probably do it again. But as Pikachu steps into the ring and tries psyching himself up, Tim ends up spying right across the arena, and he sees the owner of the Roundhouse pulling out a vial of R and giving his Charizard a good snoot of this stuff. So, yeah, not only is Charizard bigger, but now it's going to be even more violent. As such, when it's let out of its cage, Pikachu tries running away, but the cage door behind it closes, so it's stuck in the arena with Charizard, and Tim tries to play trainer and tell Pikachu what his moves are, Thunder Shock, Thunderbolt, Volt Tackle, etc., but it turns out that Pikachu's amnesia comes with a secondary handicap. He doesn't remember how to use any of his moves, so he's pretty much screwed here. And as such, Charizard keeps running at Pikachu, attempting to just shred the little electric mouse, and Pikachu is basically just huddled into a corner as it realizes it's properly fucked. But thankfully, though, Tim manages to get into the arena, and he and Pikachu basically start double-teaming the Charizard, which tries throwing it off. Of course, the Charizard's owner comes in to try and stop them, but he gets knocked aside. But when he gets knocked aside, it causes all the vials of R that he had in his jacket to break open and begin flooding the whole arena, causing all the Pokemon in the area to just go nuts. However, as such, in the midst of the chaos, Tim manages to get to the Roundhouse owner, and he manages to interrogate about what happened. And the guy admits that he got these vials from a doctor, and basically he doesn't know who the doctor is or where she came from, but she was happily giving this stuff out, so he just took it. As such, it's a lead, but clearly not enough of a lead, because, again, he doesn't know where the doctor came from. Unfortunately, though, while all the other Pokemon end up leaving the Roundhouse, Charizard is still on a rampage, and ultimately, in the midst of the chaos, one of the Pokemon that was let loose was Magikarp, as it was in a tank that got broken open, and so Pikachu attempts to get Magikarp to evolve into Gyarados to try and fight off Charizard, which doesn't work at first, but thankfully, delayed reaction syndrome, it evolves into Gyarados, and it ends up flooding the arena. It ends up flooding the arena just as the effects of the R wear off from Charizard. And as such, Charizard, Tim, and Pikachu are thrown out of the Roundhouse just as the police arrive, and Tim is put under arrest. Thankfully, he's let go right away by Lieutenant Yoshida, especially when Tim admits that he was looking into what happened to his dad and wants Lieutenant Yoshida to look into the case. But Lieutenant Yoshida isn't really going for it. He thinks that Tim going into this case is just him in denial, that he's not accepting his grief. And so to try and get Tim to kind of come to terms with what happened to his dad, he ends up pulling out security footage of the bridge that night. As when he plays it, it shows, that his dad was blasted right off the road, and there was very little chance that anyone could have survived that. And this knowledge does break Tim a little, and so as he and Pikachu are let go, Tim begins having some regrets here, as basically combined with what he saw in the apartment and knowing that his dad is not alive anymore, he begins wishing that he had spent more time with him, because obviously his dad wanted to reconnect. Harry wanted Tim in his life, and he wanted to put in the steps to try and have them become a family again. Unfortunately, because Harry and Tim had too much distance put between them, Tim didn't even want to take his hand. And so when the time came for when Harry wanted Tim to come join him, Tim didn't want to go. And now he regrets not even giving him a chance. However, Pikachu does console Tim by stating that if his dad was here, he'd give him a really big hug right now, say it's not his fault, and that he'd be really proud of him. It's honestly a nice scene, and it does lift Tim's spirits enough that he wants to get back on the case. If his dad is truly and well dead, well, there's still the matter of Pikachu. Something happens to Pikachu that caused him to have amnesia, so they want to try and find the answer to that. However, before they can even begin looking up leads on that, a limo ends up driving up, and out of the limo comes a woman in pink who wants Tim and Pikachu to follow her. As such, they get into the limo, and they end up driving to... Sorry, I'm going to look up the name again, because I can't remember it. They end up getting driven to Clifford Industries, where they end up meeting with Howard Clifford in his office. And immediately this guy gives off a creepy vibe, because his office is big and ominous. He's petting an Eevee, which he evolves into a Flareon, and he has statues of Dialga, Palkia, and Arceus in his office. Yeah, this guy is obviously stable. Regardless, though, Howard does seem to be friendly with Tim, and even recognizes the Pikachu that he has as Harry's. And it's here where Howard does reveal a few things. It turns out that Howard had been aware of the R distribution in Rhyme City, and had actually hired Harry to look into the affairs of the R. And what he had found was that the source of the R was a lab that belonged to his son Roger. As such, Tim and Pikachu are a little shocked by this, but Howard continues telling Tim that they need to continue and that he wants Tim to continue investigating, if just to find his father. Of course, Tim thinks that there's no use, his father's dead. But then Howard reveals that there is more to the story, as he ends up projecting a hologram across his room, and it's a very sophisticated hologram, as it makes it look like you're right there in the middle of a scene. And it turns out this hologram was based off the security footage that the police had, and it covers every angle, any shot that the police may have missed or overlooked. And through this hologram, they see the car crash again, and it turns out that Harry was still alive, as he actually did crawl out of the car. But then, why hasn't anyone seen him? Well, the source of that comes in the form of Mewtwo, who floats down onto the scene and does something to Harry, as he seems to project a light on him and he seems to vanish. And it's through this we also learn where Pikachu's amnesia came from. Mewtwo was the cause of it, as he basically glamored Harry's Pikachu, and that's what resulted in him, and then his brain pretty much going boop. As such, this does at least provide some answers, but the question is still raised, where the hell is Harry? And so Howard tells Tim that if he wants to find Harry, then they need to find Mewtwo. As such, Tim and Pikachu leave, and they realize that that if they want to get an answer to this, they need to find out what Roger was doing. Why did he create the R? And thankfully, that's where Lucy comes back in, as they get in contact with her and they meet up with her at a restaurant. And it turns out that she was able to get her hands on some of Roger's files, which you get access to by spilling coffee on his lap, and while he was distracted, she looked through his laptop. And through the files, she was able to find a lab that apparently specialized in genetic research in Pokémon. And as such, Lucy volunteers to take Tim and Pikachu there, and with her Psyduck riding along. And what I love is that on the car ride to to the lab, the car is playing this soothing, nice music because they have to keep Psyduck calm so it doesn't get a headache. And Psyduck is taking full advantage of it, to the point where it asks Pikachu to give it a foot rub just so that it'll stay calm. When Pikachu initially refuses, he basically says, "Don't you care about your partner?" And Pikachu's like, "Okay, fine, I'll do it." I don't know, I love that, it's great. Regardless, though, the group arrives at the lab, and as part of Lucy's research, she figured out that the lab had been shut down a week prior, when Harry disappeared, as apparently there were reports of an accident that occurred, but the media has not covered it once. So it makes Lucy think that there's a cover-up going on, and, well, they want to find out, and that's part of the reason why she's here. She wants to get more of the details on that. As such, they arrive at the lab, and while the place is locked up, well, she brought pliers. They just break in through the mesh wire fence. And as such, they enter the lab, and the place is clearly deserted, but not empty, as they end up coming across several of the experiments that were being done in the lab, And the labs, and as Lucy said, the lab was specializing in Pokemon genetics, specifically genetic modification, as they find several Pokemon that have clearly been experimented on, as they find a series of Greninjas locked in all these weird pods, and how they were meant to be altered was that they were supposed to become stronger, more powerful. So it apparently had an effect on their looks, but I don't know, I couldn't see it. They look like regular Greninja, except the fact they're 3D, whatever. On top of that, they end up finding a Torterra garden. That's supposed to be rapid growth acceleration, but the Torterra and the garden seem to look fine, so they don't really know how that worked. But regardless, Tim and Pikachu end up going further into the facility while Lucy and Psyduck stay behind to get pictures of everything, but it turns out they're being watched as the security cameras are active, and we see what looks like Roger spying on them to the security cameras and then messing with the lab as he inputs some kind of key that releases the Greninja. But in the meantime, though, back with Tim and Pikachu, they end up finding ground zero of Mewtwo's escape, and they manage to accidentally activate the holographic security. And it's here where they see the head of this lab, as we see her experimenting with Mewtwo. And it turns out that, and it's here we learn where the R came from. Apparently, the R was meant to be like a manifestation of Mewtwo's psychic runoff. They basically experimented on Mewtwo, caused him to become aggressive, and then through the energy he expelled, they synthesized that into the compound they called chemical R. And it turns out that the reason why the R was being freely distributed to the underground Pokemon Fighting League was because they wanted to test it out, see how well it worked. However, that's not the only thing they discover through the holographic security, as they end up fast-forwarding to the night Mewtwo broke out, and we see the head scientist in charge of everything was working on some kind of neural interface. For what purpose, we don't know, because unfortunately, that's when Mewtwo broke out, just before she could exposit on that. But the thing is, they're still wondering, how the hell did Mewtwo get here? And how was Harry involved in this? Why did Mewtwo take Harry? Well, they rewind even further back to shortly after the lab's founding, and it turns out that, well, Mewtwo was not created here. Yeah, even in the live-action continuity, Mewtwo is still an artificially created Pokémon, but they do acknowledge that Mewtwo escaped from the Kanto region 20 years prior to this movie. So then, how did it get to this lab? The answer is Harry. Apparently, shortly after this lab was founded, Harry was hired by whoever was put in charge of the place to locate and capture Mewtwo, which Harry accepted. Of course, when Tim and Pikachu learn this, they're just aghast because Harry didn't seem like a bad guy. Everyone seemed to like him, so why would he want to capture Mewtwo? And unfortunately, while they both don't want to believe it, well, they don't really have any way of judging Harry's character because Pikachu has amnesia and Tim hasn't seen the guy in years. So they really have nothing they can base this on. As such, Tim and Pikachu leave as Tim wants to go find Lucy, but unfortunately by the time he finds her, she's in the hands of the Greninja. And so, while Tim is able to throw them off by activating the fire suppression system in the lab, allowing him, Pikachu, Lucy, and Psyduck to escape, the Greninja are hot on their tails and they have to just make a run for it, which leads them right through the Torterra garden, which apparently leads outside into a forest. Unfortunately, the Greninja are not backing down, so Pikachu is able to at least throw them off by giving Psyduck a headache, by irritating it, saying that it's gross, the soothing music sucked, he didn't like rubbing his feet, and he'll never forgive his hands for what they did, and this does irritate Psyduck enough for him to cause a psychic explosion, which does send the Greninja flying. However, it also seems to cause something else as the very fucking ground begins shaking and the landscape begins shifting and twisting and turning and rising. As such, at first Pikachu thinks this is a side effect of Psyduck's headache blast, but no, this is real. They have to run. And sure enough, when they run far enough, they soon learn why this is happening. You remember how I said that the Torterras were part of a growth acceleration experiment? These are the fruits of their labor. As this was not a forest, this was a Torterra garden. These Torterra are the size of fucking mountains. That is both awesome and terrifying. But as the Torterra are being stirred, unfortunately several bits of rock and debris are flying all over the place, and one ends up hitting Pikachu and causes it to fall off one of the Torterra's back right into a nearby river, with Tim, Lucy, and Psyduck following after as all of them take a dive, and, well, for the most part they're all okay. Well, it was a pretty big rock to Pikachu's head, so he's not doing so well. As such, while Tim is trying to rouse Pikachu awake because he doesn't want him to be hurt, Well, help arrives in the form of a Bulbasaur and, well, actually several Bulbasaurs. And Tim is able to plead with them to try and help Pikachu. And while at first Lucy thinks that they can't understand him, well, Pikachu earlier stated that Pokemon can understand humans, but they don't. But it's not really the words they understand, but the feelings they emit. So as long as they cannot truly understand the feelings, they know what a person is talking about. And so the Bulbasaur do realize that Pikachu is hurt, and Tim wants to help it. And as such, the Bulbasaur all come in and basically will lead Tim away, but they do bar Lucy and Sonic from following. As such, Lucy says that she'll just go wait by the car, and the Bulbasaur end up leading Tim and Pikachu into a little grove, or like a small canyon, and they implore Tim to put Pikachu on a stone pedestal, but then they all leave, and so Tim is wondering what the hell's going on until he sees who they brought him to, Mewtwo, who at first Tim is freaking out about, only for Mewtwo to exert his psychic powers on Pikachu, and Pikachu is healed. Although I should probably use they, them for this version of Mewtwo, because their voice in this version is very much gender neutral. Sometimes it sounds like a man, sometimes it sounds like a woman. I think I can safely use the they, them pronouns for this version of Mewtwo. As such, Pikachu is healed, but Tim wants to know where the hell his dad is. And it's here where Mewtwo wants to try and give some information on this. And so Mewtwo projects a psychic image into Tim and Pikachu's minds, and we soon learn how Mewtwo was able to escape from the lab earlier. It turns out it was Pikachu. The power surge that allowed him to break from his pod was caused by Pikachu. And so Mewtwo escaped, and of course was there when Harry and Pikachu went off the bridge. Unfortunately, though, before we can get any further details about what happened, the vision is interrupted as, guess what? Mewtwo gets captured by Roger. As such, Roger just evilly smiles as Mewtwo is hauled into a truck and taken away, and Tim wants to try and find Mewtwo and help it, but Pikachu isn't going for that anymore, because according to that vision, Pikachu betrayed Harry, and so Pikachu doesn't trust himself to try and be Tim's partner anymore. And as such, while Tim tries to implore Pikachu to stay with him because he doesn't think he'd betray him, Pikachu isn't going for it, and basically as the two of them end up struggling, as Tim grabs Pikachu's hand to try and implore to stay, Pikachu ends up getting irritated enough that he accidentally zaps Tim. As such, Pikachu ends up leaving as he doesn't want to hurt Tim anymore, and it's here where Lucy and Tim end up meeting back up, but Tim realizes that nothing he can say can convince Pikachu, so he's just going to leave him be. In the meantime, he has to get back to the Rhyme City because he wants to talk to Howard about what Roger did. And coincidence, then when they arrive back in the city, it's when the Pokemon parade is going on. As we see various balloons being filled up, as everyone's getting ready, the police are called in to provide security, all that nice jazz, and eventually. And once Tim and Lucy arrive, Tim basically abandons Lucy because he wants to go find Howard, and he does. And while Lucy wants Tim's help to crack the story, Tim says that she's got enough information, she should crack the story. And as such, Lucy takes this information, and she does go to one of the news anchors to try and get her to tell the story, but the news anchor hasn't taken her seriously. In fact, she just tells her to get her some coffee. And so Lucy just ignores and so Lucy, who was just handed this lady's jacket, decides to just ignore the order and just go into press anyway to try and break the story herself. That's going to get her fired. Regardless, though, Tim ends up running to, gonna look up the name again, sorry, I keep forgetting it, Clifford Industries. Tim goes to the Clifford Industries main building, and he runs up to Howard's office, but when he arrives there to tell Howard, hey, your son's got Mewtwo, he sees Howard wearing the neural interface. And he tells Tim that everything is going to be fine now, as the floor of his office opens up, and from the floor rises a pod with Mewtwo inside. And not only that, we actually cut back to Pikachu as he's feeling sorry for himself, and in his wanderings he's actually arrived back at the bridge, and it turns out there's some evidence left behind from when Harry's car crashed. And it turns out the thing that blew Harry off the road wasn't an attack from Mewtwo. It was a water star created by a Greninja, meaning that the lab sent them after Harry, and that Mewtwo was actually trying to protect Harry and Pikachu. But then, why didn't Howard know that? After all, he had the 3D recreation in his lab. He should have known that Mewtwo wasn't a threat to Harry. And, yeah, with all these pieces cut together, we soon learned who the real mastermind behind everything was. It was Howard. So, why is he doing all this? Why did he do everything? Simply put, he thinks he's found the cure for his degenerative disease. And that cure is Mewtwo. You see, the neural link that he created, he's also fastened to Mewtwo's head. And when both are activated at the same time, it'll transfer Howard's mind into Mewtwo's. Although to make Mewtwo more docile to the mind transference, Mewtwo is given a good dose of that R gas, and sure enough, it causes Mewtwo's mind to go into enough of a frenzy that Harry's able to just slip his mind right in and take over. So, what? So okay, he wanted Mewtwo. He wanted Mewtwo because he wanted Mewtwo's body. Okay, fine. But what about all this other stuff? Why try and frame Roger? Why create the R? Why do all of this? Well, remember how I said that Howard kind of has a god complex? Well, I didn't actually say those words. I just said he was not well. Well, the thing is, Howard genuinely believes in the power of Pokemon. He thinks they are incredible creatures, that they can evolve into the best versions of themselves, that they're strong, they're powerful, and just keep getting better. And he thinks that humans would be so much better if they could be like Pokemon. So he wants to make them into Pokemon. So, and it turns out one of Mewtwo's abilities is that he can actually merge the soul of a human with that of a Pokemon. But the problem is that you can't do that merge unless the Pokemon are in the right mental state, which is where the R comes in. Because one way that the Pokemon can be more docile to being merged with a person, they have to be whipped up into a frenzy. If they become chaotic, angry, and just uncontrollable, it leaves their minds wide open, and it will allow Mewtwo to merge a human with a Pokemon, essentially turning the human into that Pokemon. Which brings us to the parade that's going on. It turns out that all the balloons in the parade are filled up with the R gas. And what Howard wants to do is that he wants to open up the balloons and just cause the entirety of Rhyme City to be covered in this gas and cause all the Pokemon in the city to just go nuts. And then as they're going nuts, he'll come flying in with Mewtwo's powers and just merge the people with their Pokemon. Of course, this is not something that a lot of people want to happen, but well, he basically thinks that they don't have a choice, that this is the best thing for everyone. And as for why he killed Harry, well, Harry was asking too many questions. After all, Harry was the one that brought Mewtwo in, but Harry had no idea what his end goal for Mewtwo was. And so when Harry looked into the affairs of the R and tracked it back to the lab and learned that Mewtwo was the source and what Howard was planning to do, well, it turns out he was the one that put Pikachu up to trying to free Mewtwo. So Harry basically did a double cross on Howard, and the whole reason why Howard was trying to compel Tim to find Mewtwo was, again, so that he could get this whole show on the road. As such, Timber's troubles gets thrown across the room, and, well, Howard enacts his evil plan as he flies out of his office and uses Mewtwo's psychic powers to just rip open all the balloons and douse the entire city with R. And as such, he begins calling out to the people that this is the next step in evolution, that they have to become Pokemon, and blah-bitty-blah-bitty-blah. Basically, he's nuts. And sure enough, as all the Pokemon breathe in the gas, he begins using Mewtwo's powers to fuse humans and their Pokemon. Of course, Lucy sees this and tries to tell everyone not to let their Pokemon breathe in the gas, but unfortunately, all of them do, and even her Psyduck gets caught in it, and so Mewtwo does merge all the people of Rhyme City with their Pokemon. As such, Pikachu arrives back on the scene, and he's able to meet back up with Lucy, who's now in the body of her Psyduck, and Lucy is able to reveal that Howard is currently is in control of Mewtwo, and that basically just blows Pikachu's he was the bad guy all along reveal out of the water. And so Pikachu realizes that he's got to stop Howard from spreading the R gas. As such, Pikachu does manage to climb on top of one of the balloons. Don't ask me how. I think it was close enough to the ground that he was able to get on it. And basically, he manages to get himself pumped up enough that he's able to use electric attacks again, and he causes one of the balloons to explode, causing Howard to see him, and, well, we get a tried and true Pokemon battle in this movie. As we see Howard and Pikachu using their powers to duke it out right all across the city. Pikachu managing to get on the back of a Pidgey as it flies around too. Mewtwo, with Howard flying after him in his Mewtwo body. Pikachu trying to do any electric attacks he can, blowing up whatever balloons he comes across. It's some good stuff, and I love it. But in the meantime, Tim manages to recover, and as he tries struggling, he ends up hearing someone struggling in a closet of Howard's office, and sure enough, inside the closet is Roger, who is tied up and gagged. And so Tim ends up pulling the gag off of Roger's mouth, and Roger just tells Tim to look behind him, and sure enough, he looks behind him, and he sees the Roger that took Mewtwo earlier. Only it's not a Roger. As this Roger pulls off his glasses, and he's got little black beady eyes. Yeah, this is a Ditto. And the reason why it can shapeshift into people rather than just Pokemon, it's another one of the genetic experiments that his dad did. So this thing has been his loyal companion throughout the entire thing, and it proceeds to try beating the shit out of Tim by shapeshifting into Pokemon, and even into Lucy, so that Tim will let his guard down. And as such, while Tim is trying to fight with Ditto, he nearly gets knocked out of the office, with even Howard telling his Ditto to finish Tim off. But thankfully, Pikachu is able to get one good blow in for Howard as he does a Volt Tackle, which throws Howard right into his building, which I love that. Although, unfortunately, this attack does take a lot out of Pikachu to do. But thankfully, though, before Tim can get thrown off, Roger managed to regain his senses, break free of his bonds, and ends up kicking Ditto right out of the building and helping Tim back up. Unfortunately, though, they don't get very far before Ditto comes back as a flying Pokemon. I genuinely don't remember its name. I think I don't know. And Roger ends up getting knocked out, but thankfully, as Ditto tries to go after Tim, it shapes into the Charizard, and Tim ends up right near the pod where Mewtwo was, and it keeps biting at him, but ends up biting at enough hoses that begin releasing R-gas again. And so Tim grabs onto the hose and gives Ditto a good snoot of the stuff, and rather than going insane, it messes with Ditto's physiology to the point where it just rapidly shapeshifts until it just melts. It's kind of dark, but whatever. In the meantime, though, back with the Pokemon outside, Howard actually survived the attack from Pikachu, and so he grabs Pikachu and just kind of chastises them and says, "Did you really think you could win this fight? Pikachu cannot beat Mewtwo." And so Pikachu responds, "Yeah, I know, but I wasn't trying to beat you, just trying to distract you." And so Mewtwo realizes what's going on. He looks back to his office, and he sees Tim removing the neural interface from Howard's body, which in turn sends Howard's mind right back where it belongs. Howard's been defeated. How Pikachu knew about this, don't ask me how, but I'm willing to let it slide because we're near the end of the movie, and I don't know. I like that fight scene. Okay, it's a good comeuppance for the bad guy. However, when Mewtwo are now back in control of his body, their senses are still wonky as Mewtwo ends up falling, and they end up dropping Pikachu as a result. But thankfully, Mewtwo manages to regain enough of themselves that they're able to stop Pikachu from hitting the ground. As Tim meets back up with Mewtwo and Pikachu on the ground, and Pikachu implores Mewtwo to try and undo the damage that Howard caused, and Mewtwo says that they can, as they fly into the sky and manage to release a big psychic wave that not only dispels the R-gas, but also manages to unfuse all the people from their Pokemon. As such, Howard ends up everything starts calming down. Howard finally gets exactly what he deserves as the police arrive and haul him away. Roger blames himself because apparently he wasn't there enough for his dad. And on top of that, Roger actually comments Lucy, because earlier in the movie, Lucy went up to Roger wanting him to look into the story, but Roger didn't want to do anything because she didn't have enough sources. But he's like, "No, you knew about this before anyone. I want you to go on camera, and I want you to end the news report by saying that Howard's son Roger will do everything he can to try and undo the damage that his father caused and fix the genetic experiments that his dad created." So, hey, Lucy's moving up in the world, that's great. But as everything is settling down and everyone's all calm and good, Mewtwo arrives back on the scene and reveals that they still have one more thing left to try and fix. And sure enough, Tim is able to realize that they're talking about Harry. And so Tim asks where did Mewtwo take Harry, and Mewtwo reveals that Harry's been with Tim the whole time. And yeah, Tim and Pikachu kind of start putting pieces together as Mewtwo once more shows them the vision from earlier, and this time they finish it. And it turns out that after Harry had his crash, Pikachu apparently implored Mewtwo to help Harry. And, well, while Mewtwo in every version of the story definitely does not have a positive opinion of humanity, seeing the compassion between Tim and Pikachu and the fact that they risked their lives to try and save Mewtwo has convinced Mewtwo that not all humans are bad. And so what Mewtwo did was that he merged Harry with Pikachu, as Pikachu was actually pleading with Mewtwo to do this, and, well, I guess consent actually is a way for Mewtwo to be able to merge a Pokemon and a human soul. But unfortunately, the damage to Harry's body was so bad that the only way that Mewtwo could fully repair Harry was if he had someone of a genetic match. Well, he doesn't say that. Well, Mewtwo doesn't say those words specifically. They do say that the damage was so bad that they need the help, that they need the sun in order to fix Harry. And as such, Mewtwo implores Pikachu to try and seek Tim out. Of course, the process of merging Harry with Pikachu will screw with Pikachu's memory, so Pikachu will remember any of what happened, but his heart will still remember, and so Mewtwo implores Pikachu to try and find Tim. And as such, that's where the vision ends, and, well, since Tim is here right now, Mewtwo is able to work their magic, and, well, they end up unfusing Harry from Pikachu. From there, the film cuts to later as we see Tim at a train station with an away ticket, and sure enough, that's when his dad arrives, and I'll actually give some credit. I do kind of like this twist. I mean, it's a little out there in terms of things, but throughout the entire movie, anytime we ever saw Harry, we never saw his face. It was either his legs, his body, or his back, but we never saw his face. So I love that they were just basically baiting us with Harry's Harry's true identity, because if they saw that Harry was played by Ryan Reynolds, it would give away the twist right from the get-go. So I like that. I actually like that. But yeah, Harry is on the scene with his Pikachu, and it's clear that Harry's memories of the whole event are clearly a little foggy, as he doesn't remember that he was helping Tim throughout the whole thing, but he's here to see Tim off, and while at first they try to be formal about it and just try to shake hands, they pull each other in for a hug because clearly they are happy to have seen the other person. However, as Tim goes to the train and wants to leave, he ends up turning back to his dad and says, "Hey, could I stay with you for a while?" And Harry happily accepts the offer, accepts the invitation, or Harry just happily lets him stay. As such, Tim throws his ticket away, and he and Harry go off as Tim suggests they get some coffee, and even Harry admits that he's having a craving for this stuff. And so Harry asks his son, "So what are you going to do while you're in the city?" And Tim says, "I think I'm going to become a detective," with Pikachu happily agreeing. So, and thus, that's where the film ends, and I think it's a pretty good ending, so. That was Pokémon, Detective Pikachu, and my thoughts on this movie, I just think it's pretty damn good. Do I think it's great? No. Now, like I said, while I do like how the Pokémon look in this movie, I will also admit they do take some getting used to. Transitioning the anime-esque look of Pokémon into live action, I do think is a bit of a heavy task to undertake. And while for the most part, I do think it works, because quite frankly, I do like that the Pokemon do look realistic enough. I mean, they're obviously CG, of course, but I do think the transition from an animated form to a live-action form, well, it was a pretty good one. The fluffy Pokemon look fluffy, the scaly Pokemon look scaly, the buff Pokemon look buff. All of them do look like they are properly there, and the textures really look very detailed, as it's clearly the creators and the filmmakers were trying to stay as true to the Pokemon's original look as they could when transitioning them from 2D sprite/2D anime to a live-action setting. And for the most part, I think they worked. With that said, though, there is a bit of Uncanny Valley in there. And from a first glance, I do think that it will take some getting used to if you're used to seeing the Pokemon from either the video games or the anime. So, well, at the very least, I don't think it's a bad transition. I do think I do think that it does have some growing pains. Not bad at all. I just want to make that clear. Still like how they look in this movie. I just think that that if you're used to seeing Pokemon a certain way, then seeing them in live action is definitely going to make you scratch your head a little. On top of that, I'm just going to say right now, the mystery, well, not a bad one, is a pretty simple one as well. I'm speaking as someone who has never played Detective Pikachu, the original 3DS game or its sequel on the Switch. I have not played either of those games. I was aware of their existence, hence why I saw the connection between them and this movie, but speaking as someone who has never played those games, quite frankly, the twist with Howard, well, I will give credit, was hinted, it was, I think, actually, was, I think, handled somewhat well, is also pretty damn obvious when you actually meet Howard. Like, the guy looks like a nice, amiable guy, but the instant you see his office, you just get the sense that this guy has a god complex. Because, seriously, he has statues of the embodiments of time and space right just hanging behind him, as well as the literal Pokemon god. This guy clearly has a high opinion of himself and clearly sees himself on the same status as these things that can control the very foundations of reality. So, yeah, the guy is clearly not well in the head, and there are hints of things creepier going on with him, like his Ditto, because we saw that because that woman that was pink, that was his Ditto. That was one of the forms that his Ditto could shapeshift into. We saw her hanging out at the Roundhouse and reporting to her boss about Tim, and likewise, we'll give credit that they tried to that they did well with the misdirect with trying to make us think Roger was the bad guy, since we saw Howard's Ditto shapeshift into Roger for whatever reason when no one was around. I don't know why. At the very least, when it came down to Howard being the bad guy, it was kind of obvious. Now, not going to claim that the mystery was completely bad. Like I said, I think the misdirects were, I think, pretty good, and I liked that. And quite frankly, I do like that there were actually some legitimate twists and turns to the mystery, which I'll explain more about when I get to the positives of the movie. It's just that for the who of this whodunit, it was pretty friggin' obvious. And basically, Howard ticks all the tropes for your standard typical I'm obviously evil even though I'm pretending not to be kind of villain. He looks all gracious, he acts all nice, but he also has grand espousing speeches about how something is so perfect and how humanity was more like it, they'd be grand. In this case, he's talking about Pokemon, obviously, but he clearly has a deeper infatuation with these things beyond seeing them as magnificent creatures, and seeing that infatuation goes so far that make it for him to say, "Oh, people need to be turned to Pokemon in order for humanity to survive." It's nuts. It's nuts in the head and scary. I don't like it. It's creepy. I don't like this guy. So, at the very least, I do think that the twist with him being the villain was a little obvious for the film, and I do find that to be a problem. With that said, what makes the film work, in my opinion, is, for one thing, the respect they have for the source material. This movie does not look at the Pokemon franchise as just a thing that they can take advantage of in order to get a few bucks from the nerd crowd. The people that clearly worked on this movie did understand the source material and did their best to emulate it as well as possible. They did their time, they did their research. They looked into Pokemon and what make them tick. They emulated the feel of being in the Pokemon anime or the games when they visited the material, and I thought it worked. Like, going back to the scene in the Roundhouse, they had an announcer for the Roundhouse, and they had a big billboard behind the announcer, and every time Pokemon fought in there, he would call out whatever moves the Pokemon were using, say what it was a critical hit, like in the games. It's actually pretty damn nice. In the beginning of the film, we saw Tim being coerced by his friend to use a Pokeball to try and catch Cubone, and I love the transition of the Pokeball into live action as it emulated how catching a Pokemon in both the games and the anime, which I thought was pretty damn nice. And the fact that this movie is aware of so many of the Pokemon from so many different generations is really nice. I saw Pokemon from plenty of generations. Gen 1, Gen 4, Gen 3, Gen 5 at that point. They clearly did their research and wanted to try and emulate it. They didn't say, well, this Pokemon's a thing, what's its name, and then just gave it whatever powers that came to mind. No, they actually took the time and effort to try and make everything feel like it's in the same universe as the games. Even going back to Mewtwo. I thought it's, like, when I first saw this movie and I saw Mewtwo in the lab, I thought they were once again trying to revamp Mewtwo's origin story. Kind of like what they did with Genesect and The Legend Awakened, except this is obviously a different continuity from that movie. But I like that they actually took the time and said, oh no, we didn't create Mewtwo in this lab, we just captured him. He's from the Kanto region. Which I kind of love how that sort of implies that this movie is somewhat in the same universe as the anime. It's never confirmed, so this is all just a fan theory on my part. So there's no confirmation that Ash Ketchum is a thing in this continuity. But quite frankly, I just love that they add a little attention to detail, and I think it works. even Mewtwo's origin as a clone of Mew. I like that they actually go to the effort to try and pay respects to the source material, and it's to such a great degree that any fan of the original source material can notice what they're doing, and in my opinion, appreciate it. And they do have some genuinely good, and on top of that, the humor for the movie, I think, is pretty damn good. You got Ryan Reynolds as one of the lead characters. Of course there's going to be humor in this movie. And there is plenty to be found around. But plenty of the humor comes from between the interactions, that comes from the interactions between Tim and Pikachu, because quite frankly, their dynamic is just lovely. I love how Tim is clearly just not, even when he accepts that that he can talk to this Pikachu, he doesn't fully believe it. He's like, okay, I can talk to a Pikachu. What do I do with this? And so while he does work with Pikachu, he clearly doesn't want to be attached to Pikachu. As clearly after the death of his mother, he has distanced himself from Pokemon. As like I said, he wanted to be a trainer, but gave those dreams up but then gave those dreams up. So clearly, him being distant from Pokemon is part of the. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry about that, I almost choked on my own saliva there. But yeah, like I said, him clearly putting distance between himself and Pokemon is part of the psychological trauma that came from both his mother's death and him distancing himself from his father. So him intentionally trying to put emotional distance between himself and Pikachu is clearly a part of that. But it's still a fun dynamic. I love the joke. I love how they work off each other. I love Pikachu's insistence that they be partners, while Tim is basically like, no, we're not partners, we're just working together for now. There's obviously initial reluctance as he has to put up with Pikachu's snarkiness, especially since, obviously, he's the only one that can understand Pikachu, so he's the only one that can hear his one-liners, and he clearly has to groan with them while everyone else is like, what's wrong with you? So I think that's great. I love it. But on top of that, I actually just love Pikachu's bravado. He has the same kind of... He carries with him the same kind of natural charisma that Ryan Reynolds just exudes, and I think it works for them, and I think it kind of works, which also works toward the humor when you realize that same bravado is coming from a tiny little mouse. It's actually pretty great, as the juxtaposition of the two actually makes for a very comedic character, one who is serious about what he's doing and is dedicated to try and finding the truth, but also is this cute, adorable, cuddly little creature that everyone that basically has to continue relying on this human in order to get around because he's so tiny that he can barely move on two little legs. And even when he does end up finding leads and figuring out how things connect together, he's not a good people person. Going back to the scene with Mr. Mime, Tim is the one that comes up with the idea to interrogate Mr. Mime by using miming and charades to try and mimic pouring gasoline on it. In the meantime, though, Pikachu is not understanding a thing Mr. Mime is doing, as Mr. Mime is talking exclusively with sign language and movements and so forth, and Pikachu misinterprets everything, and I love the scene. I love the scene, like when Mr. Mime tells him to shove it. It's like, open a can and shove it. It's like, what are you doing? I push people away, and this is him. He's telling you can shove it. And when Tim gets it, Mr. Mime just gives a smirk to Pikachu, and I love that. And then likewise, when Tim starts pouring gasoline on Mr. Mime, Pikachu's like, what is it? It's a cookie, making salting. Cookies about following your heart, not following the recipe. And then Tim and Mr. Mime just both go, what? As they look at Pikachu, Mr. Mime has to go like this around it. It's like, oh, gas! Like, yeah, I don't know. I love that. It's just some nice bits of humor. And seeing Pikachu get sort of humbled in the roundhouse when it goes to fight Charizard, but can't remember any of its moves. It's great. I love it. It's just some great stuff. I will say the drama around the third act when Pikachu tries to leave Tim does feel a little cliche. I gotta understand it kinda because it was Pikachu that set Mewtwo free, and since Pikachu was Harry's partner, that kind of betrayal does hurt Pikachu, especially since he has grown close to Tim. But at the same time, I do actually like But at the same time, I do think the final battle, when he does go back to help Tim, is still genuinely fun and kick-ass, and something that does genuinely belong in a Pokemon movie. So in that regard, I think it's nice. And again, I'll actually will give the mystery some comments here. While it's obvious who the villain is, I do like the twists and turns we have in the mystery. I like the reveal of how the R fits into everything. I like when we see an explanation for Mewtwo. why he was in that lab earlier. I like that we get an explanation for the short that occurred and how it tied back to Harry and his Pikachu. And likewise, when Pikachu does figure out that Howard is the bad guy, I think it's a good aha moment, because it plays on details that we were not privy to. As we learn more about the situation that we had not been aware of before, but it also raises the obvious questions, like, because the 3D simulation that Howard created in his office was supposed to be a perfect simulation, so he obviously would have known that Mewtwo wasn't the one that threw Harry's car off the road. So then why didn't he say anything? I like that. That little bit of begging the question does a great job at hinting that Harry is the bad guy. And of course, a scene later, that's when we see Harry taking full advantage of Mewtwo, so at that point it confirms he's the bad guy. But I actually do like the little aha moment. He may be an obvious villain, but I do like how they work toward the reveal. And again, I'll give credit where it's due. The misdirects with his son, I think are pretty good, because like, you know that because even if I was at that point I was willing to buy that Roger was one of the bad guys, that's obvious that Howard is involved somehow. Like again, he gives off evil mastermind vibes. It's obvious he's involved somehow. And if Roger is involved in this, at best he's the middleman here. So I didn't actually while I saw the twist as obvious, I will give some credit that they did a good job at misdirecting. Quite frankly, I forgot about the Ditto. Like, and seeing Roger constantly wearing the sunglasses, which are the same sunglasses that the pink lady was wearing before, that we was wearing earlier, I think it's a good way of still concealing the identity. And when you see the real Roger and the Ditto in the same room, and the Ditto Roger takes off its sunglasses, and you see the little beady eyes, it's creepy. Like, legitimately creepy. I like it. I think that's actually pretty good. So again, like that. I like that. I think the mystery and the twists and turns, with the final reveal thing being an obvious one, I think the twists and turns and seeing how everything fits together, I think was pretty nice. And I think the mystery overall was, again, maybe predictable, but I think complex enough that I think kids could very easily take an enjoyment out of seeing how everything fits together. So I'll at least give you that. Maybe a simple mystery, but not a terrible one. A decent one. It's a decent mystery. Obvious in some regards, but the how done it is more interesting than the who done it, if you ask me. So I'll give some comments there. And then on top of that, going back to the writing, I love Tim. I like Tim's character arc throughout this movie. I think that's actually the glue. I think that's the very thing that held it together. I like Tim's character arc and the complexities that come from his relationship with his father, so strained as it is, because ultimately all it comes down to it, the strain between Tim and Harry feels real because they both played into what made the relationship strained. Basically how it started was after the death of Tim's mom, Harry distanced himself from Tim because obviously he was grieving, and he dove right into his work, and obviously trying to get away from anything that reminded him of Tim's mom. He moved to Rhyme City and worked there. Now, eventually, Harry was able to move past his grief, but by that point in time, he had done so much damage to his relationship with Tim that when he tried to build a bridge out to Tim so that he could reconnect again by trying to get Tim to move to Rhyme City with him, well, at that point Tim wanted nothing to do with Harry. Harry had put so much distance that Tim just wanted to stay away. And so while Harry never took down the bridge, as he obviously wanted to be with his son, well, unfortunately, when you're trying to make a connection with someone, both of you have to build a bridge. And unfortunately, before Harry started building that bridge back up, he had already torn down quite a few with Tim. So unfortunately, Tim didn't want to put in the effort on his side. Harry made his choices, and basically Tim wanted nothing to do with that. And as a result, I do like how those choices affect Tim in the present day. As in the beginning of the movie, Tim is, I don't want to say content with the life he has as working in insurance, but it's clearly where he thinks he belongs, because he has more of a connection to town, rather than his father in Rhyme City. And so even when his friend is telling him, you gotta get your own Pokemon, everyone else has gone on a journey, and I know you want to go on a journey yourself, of course Tim's like, no, I live here, I was raised by my grandmother here, I don't want to leave here, everything's nice. And the only reason he actually does leave his hometown is because of the quote-unquote death of his father in Rhyme City. And since Tim is Harry's closest living relative, he has to go in to try and, clean up his affairs and sort everything out. And obviously it was supposed to be just a short trip, go in, deal with everything, then get the hell out. But I like that when Tim gets there, he's still very conflicted, as the only reason he wants to be here is simply just for business purposes. Close out his dad's affairs, get everything in line, and then leave. And while I like that there is a slight hint towards his feelings with his dad, and that there is at least a small fire burning that he wants to fan the flames for, because obviously he wanted a relationship with his dad. At this point, he wants the flame to die out. But wanting the flame to die out and actually letting it burn out are two very different things, unfortunately. Unfortunately for Tim, at least, because when he does actually go to his father's apartment and sees that his father did still want him to come live with him, and even still had his room set up like Tim's was when he was a kid, or likewise had the invitation, had the birthday card with the train ticket right there on his nightstand. It's clear that even years later, Harry wanted Tim back in his life, and the only reason that that relationship hadn't come back was because Tim didn't want to put in the effort. Which, I'm not claiming that Tim's an asshole for not wanting to put in the effort. Like I said, it's a two-way street here. Harry neglected his son because he was dealing with the death of his wife, and then by the time he had overcome that grief and wanted to rebuild that relationship, so much damage had been done that Tim didn't want to go back in. But I like the conflict that comes from Tim seeing that his dad genuinely wanted him back in his life and wanted him to feel at home. I think that's sweet, and I like that, and I can love the conflicting emotions we see from Tim as a result of that. And then likewise, when Tim and Pikachu do begin looking into Harry's disappearance and he begins finding clues, you can tell that Tim is actually getting excited because now he knows that his dad did want to have a connection with him. He thinks that if his dad's truly alive, then he could probably rekindle that relationship, and thus he wants to pursue this case because he does want to get answers to what the hell's going on. But then likewise, when he's arrested later at the roundhouse and Lieutenant Yoshida tells him, no, your dad's dead, here's the footage of his crash, I love that it basically just breaks him, and he finally expresses his true feelings. In this case, it's regret. He regrets not spending time with his father. He regrets not getting on the train to see his father when he was a kid. He regrets not spending more time with him, and he wishes that he could go back and take it all back. He wishes that he could have given his dad a chance, and now he can never have it back. And so much, I think, is really good, and I think it also helps deepen his relationship with Pikachu, as Pikachu does become a sort of father figure. Which, I'll also say this, the reveal with Harry being Pikachu, I actually give credit, I think it was hinted at well enough and was kept enough of a mystery. Maybe it's a little cliche, but I'm okay with it. I think they hinted at it enough, as Pikachu did have enough fatherly moments in there that you can buy that he was Harry. And like I said, they never revealed Harry's real face throughout any of his appearances in the movie, because it's Ryan Reynolds. The instant you see his face, you'll know, oh, he's Pikachu. So at the very least, I understand. So I can understand why they had to keep that a secret. But I actually do think the hints towards Pikachu's true identity were pretty good ones, at least. And so seeing Tim and Pikachu bond throughout the movie, I think is really nice. And when presented with the possibility that his dad is alive, that Mewtwo is responsible for Harry's disappearance, Tim once more goes all in on wanting to find him. And I actually think that really works. And so by the end of the movie, when Tim and Pikachu work together to stop Howard's plans and save the day, I think it's a well-earned victory. And the reveal and ultimately when Tim realizes that he's been working with his dad the whole time, well, it makes the ending that much more poignant, because now he's finally gotten the chance to know his dad a bit, and while there is still clearly a disconnect between them, both now at this point now both of them want to put in the effort to try and get to know each other again, because ultimately the love they share for each other is still there, and they don't want to lose it again. They want to be in each other's lives, and so it makes the ending where Tim basically throws away his return ticket and says he wants to stay with his dad that much more poignant, and it actually makes me smile. I think the ending is pretty damn sweet, and I think it's nice. It's nice. I love seeing a father and son reunite. I love seeing them bonding together. It's genuinely sweet stuff, and I just think it's well worth the while. And I find that character journey and arc to actually be a very interesting one. So I think that's another bit of glue that held the film together. So honestly, though, when it comes down to it, I think that's the main reason why I think Detective Pikachu works. I will say this: I think one potential flaw with this movie is that if you want to truly appreciate everything involved with it, then you need to be at least familiar with the Pokemon franchise, or possibly even be a fan of it. But honestly, I think even if you're not a fan of the Pokemon franchise, you can still enjoy this movie. Yeah, there's plenty still in this movie that a true Pokemon fan would have come to appreciate, but the previous times I saw this movie, I saw with people who only knew the barest of bare minimum about Pokemon. The first time I saw it was in theaters with my cousin, and to my knowledge, he was not a big Pokemon fan, and yet he still liked it. After that, I watched it with my mom, who was very much not a Pokemon fan, and she enjoyed it too. I mean, I think she didn't love it as much as other people did, but she liked it. She thought it was cute. So I do think that general audience members can enjoy this movie. It's just that if you want to truly appreciate all the little Easter eggs and callbacks and callbacks to the anime or the video games, you do need to be a Pokemon fan. As it stands, though, I do think the film as a whole is pretty good. The mystery may be simple in terms of who's the bad guy and so forth, and some things may be a little cliche, and yeah, the CGI Pokemon do look a little strange from a first glance, but I think overall the CGI can work the more you get used to it, and quite frankly, I think the transition into 3D was actually a good one for Pokemon. And if they do make more live-action movies, I think they can find ways to perfect it. So I'll give it. So I think that's a plus. I think the mystery, while simple, is a decent one. Nothing too great, but enough that you can give kids enough time for critical thinking skills and putting pieces together. I think the characters are well written and fun, especially the interaction between Tim and Pikachu. I loved Tim Goodman as a main character. I love the twists and turns that went into it. I actually love the humor and how it played out. I love how everyone worked off of each other. When there was action, it was pretty damn good action. When it comes, and of course, the callbacks to the Pokemon franchise, I think were really well done, and it did show a lot of groundwork that the creators and filmmakers had to do to try and make this film feel like it was a part of the Pokemon franchise. And in my opinion, I think they succeeded and then some. Ultimately, whether you're a Pokemon fan or not, I think you will enjoy this movie. But if you are a Pokemon fan, I recommend this film as a must-see. It feels like that this is a film that was made by fans of the Pokemon franchise, by people who appreciate the franchise and wanted to share that love with other fans. And in my opinion, I think Detective Pikachu represents that well. If you have not seen this movie yet, go and see it. I think it will be well worth your time. It may not be the best thing you'll see, but I think you'll have a fun time regardless. So that's really all I have to say. And since this is the final video, I think I can just say I found these vlogs to be interesting. I admit there were times that doing them felt a little taxing, similar to when I did the MCU perspectives, as taking time out to do a vlog on a movie, it can take a lot out of you, as there's a lot to cover, a lot of things to remember and go over, and ultimately, I do admit I do like doing vlogs more on television shows and episodes than I do on movies. With that said, though, I don't regret going back and watching these movies, because like the Pokemon franchise itself, all of the movies in one way or another had something creative and interesting about them. Even the worst of these movies, and yes, that includes Deontay and the Cocoon of Destruction, had things in there that I thought were worthwhile. There was always something creative or interesting to see, whether it be in a Pokemon design, an idea presented, in the story, or even in just the themes. These Pokemon films weren't just films about kids going on adventures and battling monsters that they can shove in tiny balls. These films did actually actually feel like the creators are trying to do something grander and larger and more epic with the Pokemon franchise. And while I don't think they've always succeeded in that regard, when they did succeed, I think they were really well. And in my opinion, of course, the writing was always at its best when it was very nuanced about the characters and what they were going through. And again, my top 3 films out of all the Pokemon movies are still I Choose You, Lucario and the Mystery of Mew, with both of those films actually I think being tied to my favorite film, and Power of the Unknown, as all of those films dealt with some very interesting psychological angles and delved more into the characters of our main characters and what they were going through and the complexities they had to deal and the complex emotions they had to deal with and what they had to do to overcome certain obstacles. But even then, that doesn't mean all the other films suffered as a result of that. Again, like I said, when even the worst films, in my opinion, have something in them that is worth your while. And going back and watching all these movies, regardless of the highs and the lows, was a journey that I was happy to undertake. It was nice seeing how these Pokemon films evolved and transitioned from movie to movie, seeing the cast change with each movie, seeing how each film reflected the era of the anime that they came out in. Even the reboot movies, despite the fact that they were a completely separate continuity from the anime, still felt like they kind of represented the seasons of the anime they came out around. So, and I thought that was nice. And even the ones that weren't a part of the anime, like Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, I thought it was a nice callback, and again, if we go with the English translation, it felt like a good and proper update to a film that definitely needed some retooling and reworking. As such, while I do believe the quality of the Pokemon movies tended to vary from project to project, overall, I don't regret coming back and watching these movies. It was very interesting and fun to go back and watch these films, especially in movies for seasons of the anime that I wasn't as familiar with, like with Black and White or X and Y. Well, yes, I admit that some bits of lore and knowledge probably went over my head because I wasn't as familiar with the anime as other people. But even that lack of knowledge did not stop me from enjoying the films. And yeah, while some films were definitely better than others, I think I had a good time with it. So overall, like I said, it was a bit tough to do vlogs on all these films, and watching episodes and doing vlogs on episodes is still a lot easier than doing vlogs on movies, in my opinion, especially with how I do this, with how unprofessional and uncreative these vlogs are. At the very least, I do think that going back and watching these films was worthwhile. And if you're a fan of Pokemon, regardless of how you intake the franchise, whether it be through the video games, the anime, the manga, or even the movies, I do hope that you enjoyed watching these along with me. I hope that you actually if any of my videos encouraged you to want to go out and see any of these movies for yourself, then I'm happy. I'm glad I did something right for you. But like I said, overall, this is a journey I was happy to undertake. And, well, there may be a time that I go back to watching the Pokemon movies, maybe go back and rewatch one that caught my interest, hell, even watching one of my top 3 favorites. But till that day comes, I think I just need a break from Pokemon for a while. I'm Pokemon'd out, so I need a break. I need to look at something else that's a little bit more... I need to look at something else, and next week we will be looking at something else. I'm not going to start my new vlog just yet, as next week we're going to be kind of going back to Danny Phantom for a video, but I do have another vlog series in mind, and this is one that I'm going to be a little interested in seeing how I'm able to do it. So, well, so for all of you who stay with me through all these videos, thank you. If I was able to provide any bit of entertainment for you, even if it was just laughing at my expense and how unprofessional my videos are, I'm happy. And if you want to see any more of my videos, I got a bunch of playlists on my YouTube channel that I think that you can enjoy. And, well, yeah, the quality is still not that great. In fact, some of my earlier vlogs are not that great, honestly. I do hope that if you do enjoy all these videos, that you continue watching them. Honestly, I think they're just better enjoyed as like podcast material. Just putting them on while you're doing something. As my ranting and rambling is a lot easier to digest when you have something to distract you. So, either way. But if you like what you saw, you can also follow me on my socials. I'm trying to close out my Twitter at the moment due to all the shit policies there. But you can find me on Blue Sky at Mask of Fate. I have a Tumblr, Mr. Multiversity 2. No, yeah, I have a Tumblr. It's also Mask of Fate. And of course, I have an Instagram, Mr. Multiversity 2, so if you want to follow me on any of those, go right ahead. But, well, I hope you enjoy these videos, and if you want to come back and see my new vlogs, well then I hope to see you next week as we go back to the Phantom Perspectives for a video, and hopefully I'll see you the week after when we start our newest vlog series. So, till that day comes, I hope you all have a great evening. I hope you all had a Merry Christmas yesterday. And if you want to see the vlog I did for that, go and check it out. I did a vlog on Bah Humduck, a Looney Tunes Christmas. And I hope to see you next. And I hope that you all have a happy New Year and join me for the new year of cartoons, celebrations, and just general unprofessional zaniness. So, I hope you all have a great evening. And as always, take care.